I want to get your thoughts on this trade deal or agreement with Vietnam. We know that President Trump needs a win. On the surface, it sounds like a win.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think you are going to see a few more announcements over the next few days. I think there's one being crafted with India. And, these are not entire trade deals, but they are trade deals in which some of the broad structures have been worked out, and they will be highlighted because it will say that the whole idea of a fairer trade regime for the United States is working, and a number of countries have agreed. Of course, crossing the T's and dotting the I's will take a lot more time, but expect a few of these to be announced over the next few days.
Yeah, you mentioned India. What are the main sticking points to both sides coming to terms to an agreement?
Well, almost always. First, there are easy sort of wins. India can buy more natural gas from the United States, which has a surplus of that. It will require sort of positioning Indian purchases. But there's sort of politically difficult places that India doesn't want to go. For example, agriculture, dairy products, Indian dairy farmers, it's a huge source of living, and they don't want to be swamped by cheap U.S. dairy products. So in that sense, there will be some red areas that India will not want to go to, but there are many other areas where I think agreements can be reached.
Yeah, you brought up LNG, right? And it seems to me that there's a very thick political layer on top of this as well, because we're India to agree to buy more LNG from the U.S. I mean, from the point of view of Washington, one of the things that they want to do with India is to try and pivot India away from wean India off of overdependence on cheap Russian oil, no?
That's right. I think that might be part of the larger goal. Of course, there are other sources of oil nearer India than the United States. But certainly, as far as natural gas goes, LNG is something that India has increasingly used. And as it transitions to cleaner sources of energy, LNG may be the transition sort of energy source. So it is sort of win-win if India buys more of that, and certainly the U.S. has a surplus.
And this is something that Marty brought up in the last block, talking about the case of Vietnam, that Vietnam wants to be labeled as market economy. Washington is not really giving up on that. When it comes to India's case, Raghuram, what would be some of the nuanced, non-tariff related parts of trade negotiations that we're not talking enough about?
Well, I think the non-tariff aspects of trade will be featuring quite importantly in the discussion. For example, foreign direct investment into India, to the extent that it threatens Indian national champions. I think India has been quick to put in regulations that favor domestic players. I think that will be a big source of discussion. For example, Walmart and Amazon have a beef with the extent to which they've been restricted in India relative to Indian players. So this will be all part of the discussion. There will be some structures to make sure that these don't become irritants going forward. But I think it'll be beneficial for India also to have a more level playing field where foreign direct investment can compete effectively.
What was the biggest takeaway for you looking at how Vietnam negotiations played out? Because 46% didn't go to zero. It went down to 20%, which is very steep compared to where we started the year. Do you think... And they're calling it a success. They're calling it an agreement. So do you think that we're in this for a higher tariff environment, not necessarily 46% for Vietnam type of environment? And what does that do, of course, for the global economy?
Almost surely the answer is yes, right? I mean, in part because of the philosophy behind the tariffs. It was not just about unfair trade. It was also about a revenue source to offset some of the costs of the big, beautiful bill. But also remember that it's not done yet. What we have coming is still Section 232 investigations into areas like pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, and so on.
Yeah.
And those will have their own separate tariffs set by the United States to create more of a domestic presence in those areas. So part of the concern some countries have of dealing too quickly is it a comprehensive deal? What more is coming down the line? And can we revisit some of this when those higher tariffs come in these areas, which, at this point haven't been set?
And what about Japan? Because that is a big one. And many of us assume that it will be an easy deal for Japan to get because of their security alliance and so on. That hasn't been really the case so far. And Trump has expressed doubt on the Japan deal. Do you think it's just a negotiating tactic on the public domain? And do you think this is part of this sort of negotiating tactic in terms of the sequencing of trade deals as well?
No, I think Japan has real concerns, especially with the 25% tariff on automobiles. I mean, that's a big source of exports to the United States. And, it becomes, hugely uncompetitive with those levels of tariffs if they stick. And of course, this is separate from all the other sort of reciprocal tariffs that are being imposed on Japan. Again, Japan wants to know, you have tariffs on steel also, which are hurting Japan. Japan wants to know what's the bottom line when you put everything into play. Where do we settle? And, this seems more like an interim settlement rather than the grand overall deal. And that's what, countries are worried about. And if, there's sort of a most favored nation clause with these deals, if somebody else gets a much better deal, I get to renegotiate my deal, then perhaps it's not so worrisome. But if these are final deals, then you don't want to be the sucker at this point.